So my name is Dr. Lauren Griffith. I'm an assistant professor at Texas Tech University. And I've been studying capoeira probably since about 2004. The first book that I wrote on capoeira was actually looking at Americans and Europeans, basically non-Brazilians, that maybe have questions about their own legitimacy as tradition bearers. And what I found is that many of them go to Brazil, specifically I was looking at Bahia, in order to train at the feet of the master. And this is something that I called Apprenticeship Pilgrimage, the idea of going to the source or a major hub of practice in order to augment your authenticity or legitimacy in a genre. So that was my first book, which is titled In Search of Legitimacy. And then I wrote a second book that took that theoretical idea and expanded it to look at a number of different genres, not just capoeira, but other martial arts as well, and some dance examples as well. And now I'm starting a new project, which is on capoeira and social justice. So I've been really interested, what makes capoeira in the United States unique? And talking to people all across the country, one of the things that seems really important is this idea of the origins, this story, this idea that enslaved Africans had to disguise their fighting as dance in order to resist oppression on the plantation. And I believe that a lot of groups in the U.S. are taking this story and using it as a jumping off point to fight oppression in their own communities. So you see capoeira groups that are showing up at protests. You see community groups that are organizing clothing drives in order to help people in their community go and do job interviews. All sorts of things that I never would have initially associated with capoeira, people are doing, and they're doing because it's part of this idea of graceful resistance.
That's that's interesting. I guess I haven't followed capoeira or things like that in the news. So that's a different angle than I've seen. Mm-hmm. And I guess just kind of speaking from where we started, we did a lot of that kind of stuff, but perhaps without the intention of being like a social justice type thing. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting approach to it, you know?
Well, and I think some groups are doing it intentionally, particularly those, maybe they already have an Afrocentric orientation, right. And so they want to do things that support the African diaspora, and capoeira seems like a natural fit for that. But then I think there are groups that are doing it kind of unintentionally and maybe constructing that link in retrospect. So I think both of those things are going on at the same time.
Gotcha.
And I think that there's the externally oriented social justice work, and there's also the internal social justice work, which is something very important to explore as well. When you've got an individual that maybe has never given any thought to some of the injustice going on in society today. Maybe they come from a really privileged background, but all of a sudden they're training in this environment that's very diverse, and they're starting to hear stories about, hey, I was racially profiled today. And they listen in a different way because now these people that they've been training with are friends, they're people that they respect, and all of a sudden they're open to hearing about things going on in their community that they didn't know about.
Mm-hmm. I think that's funny because when I started capoeira, I was young, and so that sort of stuff was so far from just my comprehension or even like day-to-day thought process that I can see how that those ideas and thoughts evolved over time, right. to where now I guess like the aim or the motive is perhaps different. And I see also, the longer I think that you're in capoeira, the less it becomes about your own practice.
Yes.
And more about just the responsibility of other people, And that was a huge thing for my mastery too. And I think I think a lot of people can agree as well that like upholding roots that their masteries did for them is almost like unfathomable. I can't even imagine trying to do like what he did for myself and Contra Mestre Metido,
right,
without even trying to do that.
Right.
It was just kind of like his own general hospitality and like kind nature just bled into like our own lives. And I don't think it was something he set out to like cultivate people,
right.
But it just happened.
So what are some of those changes that you've seen either in yourself or people in the group as a result of being part of Capoeira for years?
Well, if we talk about let's talk currently, not like the past 10, 12, 15 years, but I'll use Contra Messi Mechido as an example. So once he kind of took over the Capoeira group when I moved to Brazil, that was a big challenge for him. And he was young. We were both young in our early 20s. And so first developing the trust of the people that you are training when you're young like that it can be, hard to say the least.
Right.
And eventually I can look back now and I can't tell you exactly the trajectory that it happened, but so many people look at him as a leader of his community. In Austin, in Austin, but I'm talking like even more micro, like his immediate community, neighborhood,
Right.
friends, family. Like Contra Messi Mechido is one of those people who puts everybody else above him as far as like, okay, well, making exceptions for different things. And it was a very, just as it was for Messi Rodrigo, it was a very smooth process. Like it wasn't like one day he was a community leader.
Right.
He just became validated as that through the efforts that he did with people. And he runs that same effort in his Capoeira Academy and his CrossFit gym. There's almost no difference between the two communities. They're two different like forms,
Right.
but they're very like family oriented as far as like the people in them.
That's
very
interesting.
close.
Yeah.
And he organizes things every year, like we do a Blue Santa thing. So the CrossFit and the Capoeira, we get, two different families, and we all come together and donate and buy things and do gifts, and then we deliver the presents and all that kind of stuff. And one reason he does that is because he was a recipient of Blue Santa when he was a kid.
Yeah.
And now he's got this group of people that are willing to put forth the effort to do those things.
Yeah.
And some of the people in the group are not like these affluent people. They also have their own struggles, financially, but they can always find a way to give to somebody else.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest things that I've seen kind of like, Mechido kind of like take that path,
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because just about a week ago, and I'm not trying to deny credit to any individuals. I'm just careful about naming names because of the project I'm doing. I use pseudonyms.
You mind if I just push it a little?
No, perfect. But there was a mestre who was giving a class about a week or two ago, and he said, "Don't be a parasite." And that just really stuck with me because with Capoeira, you get so much. And if you just, take that gift and walk away, then you're not really repaying your debt. And so I think a lot of the people that are engaged in either social justice activism or more modest community building efforts, it's really because they feel they've been blessed by the Capoeira, they feel like they've gotten so much from the Capoeira community that they need to give back in some way.
Yeah, 100%. And I think before you make that transformation, there's a lot that has to happen where you have to take from Capoeira a little bit to develop your own identity within the art.
Right.
And then you can start helping people. Basically, like you can't help someone else if you can't help yourself first. Right. And so, I think like I agree exactly with that, but there's some students where like we've had some students who are coming up in their rankings and they want more responsibility and they want these things. And that's a great to have, but they need to work on themselves a little bit more first.
Right.
They need to be a little more bulletproof before, we start having them guide other people onto the thing.
Right. Now, how do you guys sort of choose who takes on leadership positions? Is it just about sort of physical talent, time in the art? Is there anything with regard to demographics that you look at?
I think mostly it has to do with the person's willingness to just help. That's the biggest thing, is just finding somebody to help. I think getting good at anything is just time and effort put into it. So that's almost like a non-tangible. But we don't have like we don't have like a set of rules that it's like this person now needs to do this. You know what I mean? It's kind of like an unspoken thing is that like the higher you get up into capoeira, the more responsibility you're going to be responsible for. And some people take well to that and they thrive and they continue. And some people, when they hit that level, they kind of flatline or they sort of like make their exit.
Okay.
Intentionally or unintentionally.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But it's definitely not something that we force on somebody. You know? But it is an expectation.
Sure.
You know, and I think a lot of our students understand that and they look for that. So
Right.
then it's just it's trying to figure out, okay, you know, when are they ready to do their kind of their own thing? And one sort of rule that we've had, and it's kind of old school, and it's like what my maesteri's maestri also followed was that you usually don't get your professor corda until you have your own place and you're starting your own group and you're, you know, it's overseen by the maestri or the contramaestri or the professor or whatever, but that's kind of like the turning point where it's like, okay, well, what do you really want to do? Because you can't stay at home forever.
Right.
You know?
So there's some degree of independence that's kind of built into the system and the expectations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, your group, how much engagement is there with the community? You mentioned the Blue Santa thing. What other kinds of things does your group do?
So we, Contramaestre Mechido had set up, I don't remember how many schools, after school programs he had been involved in, but he did a lot of like after school program stuff. I think there was even like a church that he used to do just some like classes for kids in the church.
Yeah.
We do things like, you know, back to school drives, and we do the Blue Santa, and we do things for like Thanksgiving. And then we also try to we really support each other and everybody in the group as well, like as a whole. So if somebody has a birthday, we do some big thing.
Right.
Or we always try to make some like group trip or like outing, you know, several times a year as like a community building event and like, you know, make it an environment to where people, they want to be in that community. And then from there, they kind of like learn how, like their own potential to like helping their neighbor.
Yeah.
You know, some people need to be shown like, yeah, you have a lot of value as well.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I've seen. The groups that do more of this community engagement are the ones that treat capoeira like a family rather than more of a commercial transaction. Those groups are definitely valuable groups, but they're not doing as much in terms of social justice.
Yeah. No, you know, we the term social justice, maybe I have like a different like idea with it, but you know, we haven't ever really used capoeira or our group as a method of like resistance,
Okay,
or protest. You know, we've done, you know, and maybe this isn't like community outreach, but we always try to be a part of like Austin's Brazilian Independence Day or like samba or you know, try to help or be collaborative with the Brazilian community here in Austin, because there's a big Brazilian community now that there used to not be, but it like cultivated over the years, and we tried to make like a good integration with that, you know, and just find efforts to help each other out there, you know.
and that's kind of why I've expanded the project to be about more than just social justice, because I think people have sort of a narrow view of what that means. They think, okay, social justice warriors, I've got to be out in the street and I'm protesting and I'm carrying my berimbau to go talk about somebody's, you know, death at the hands of the police. And there's definitely that going on. But I think this kind of very local engagement with your own community is important too. So what are the kids' classes like?
I mean, in what regard?
Like the after school programs.
So those are usually like projects where it's not necessarily like we're looking for those kids to get like ranked up, and it's like you know, it's like they go to this program outside of school, and they're gonna, you know, their parents pay for them to do this, but we train them the same way.
Okay.
We just have less resources to like have uniforms and belts and all that stuff, because we're not a nonprofit.
Right.
And so we can't just like give them all the uniforms, and we're not doing grant writing and things like that. But it's I think just like one thing that I always look at with like the kids, and I can reflect back on my own self, but like through capoeira, kids can like hit these milestones and develop more like self-confidence. And it's like anything. It's like a kid who thinks that he can't do a cartwheel or an aul.
Right.
And the first time he does it and he gets this sense of, or she gets this sense of like accomplishment.
Yeah.
Well, you can take that feeling and you can apply it to anything else. And you're like, well, I used to not be able to do this thing, but then I was able to do it. And you can take that and it could be like, you can apply that to like the homework or like the family life or the, learning to tie your shoe or something like that, you know? And I think that's like something that we see a lot with the kids program is like, they kind of, you can turn like introverted kids into extroverted kids.
Yeah.
And, get these sensation of accomplishment through capoeira and movement and music. And then those little ideas sprout seeds for you to go on and do other things you didn't think you could do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm being a little bit obtuse in asking this, but I mean, you say you're not a nonprofit, right? So why do these things?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have an answer, and I don't have an answer as to exactly why or how that happened. It just seemed like the right thing to do. And it was just like, it's what my master did for us. And he was in 25 years, I think our master has been more involved in my life outside of capoeira than inside of capoeira.
Wow.
Which is interesting, and I don't know many other people that can say that, but it was definitely not his duty, right? To like be like a father figure. It wasn't his duty. And nobody told him to do it. But he just always kind of did it, And then when you're kind of raised like that for so long, it becomes like an innate part of your character as well.
Right.
And you just kind of like do without doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense.
So yeah, I guess it's more just like once you have the ball rolling and you realize like the good things that people are getting out of what you're doing, or even just the opportunities you're giving to other people, it's almost like an addiction. You're just like, wow, like what else could I do?
Right.
And it just kind of, it goes from there.
Yeah. It is great to see that self-efficacy with the kids.
Yeah.
Now, I've spoken with somebody at a charter school in the northern Midwest, and their PE classes actually are capoeira.
Oh, that's awesome.
And this charter school, the whole focus is on social justice. And so part of the curriculum, I mean, you come and you take your capoeira class, and then afterwards you talk about resistance, basically, but in terms that kids can understand. So instead of saying, hey, let's talk about structural inequality and the perpetuation of this systematic oppression in the United States, it's more like, hey, have you ever gone to the store and felt like somebody was following you because you're black, right? How did that feel? And did you know that it's not that different in Brazil? And let's sing this song about slavery in Brazil, and kind of connecting all the dots, but in a very age-appropriate way. So do you guys do anything that overt?
Not that direct.
Okay.
And I mean, I guess one is, I'm not African American, and it would almost seem, I just don't think I'm the right person to do that. Alex is Mexican, and a lot of his like demographic are Hispanic people, and I don't know if that has anything to do with his demographic or like his heritage and things like that, or even just like where he is kind of in the city, like his location. But yeah, I just I could support it and I could help, but it's not something that I can relate to like authentically.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, it hasn't been like we've never been as direct of like use capoeira as a form of some kind of like resistance,
Yeah.
And that's interesting to me, like your project, because honestly, I had never heard of like people doing that.
Right.
Or like when you were talking about showing up to a protest with the beating bow. My initial thought was this. My initial thought, well, okay, I can understand that as a form of protest and resistance to that individual.
Right.
But it's so far unrelatable to the public that they're at that most people are still like, what's capoeira?
Right.
And what's this big fishing pole you have?
Right. Right.
You know, so
Yeah, and I wondered about that.
that's
So
what I was kind of interested in knowing a little more about.
Yeah, I asked some questions. I said, so why do you bring the brambao? Basically, because it gathers attention. I mean, it's cool. It's a novel thing for a lot of people, and they're curious. So it's that more than anything that makes people stop and look, and maybe pay more attention to the actual thing that is the subject of the protest.
Right.
So it's definitely being done in service of the protest. It's not, people aren't playing capoeira, they aren't hosting jodas at protests, that kind of thing. It's really to serve the larger goals of whatever is being protested.
So I guess I just kind of now thought of this, but one person who's very vocal about things of resistance in the African American community and also relates a lot to the Brazilian community through social media, I've seen is Mestre Shalom.
Okay.
He always has like these memes up that is some kind of like social justice thing, or like, hey, you guys need to be aware that this is happening.
Yes.
And it's also your duty and our duty to support these people.
Right.
And just be aware, but don't walk around society and especially your own community with eyes closed.
Yes.
Yeah,
and I think that that's an important thing a lot of capoeira groups are doing. So I actually had a student that just completed a project this past semester that was pretty interesting, where she went onto the internet and scoured every capoeira group in the U.S. that she could find, which in and of itself we know is a little problematic because some people have really well-developed websites and others don't. So we could only access the ones that were available. But she pulled a sample and she did a content analysis of those, and based on that, about half of the capoeira groups in the United States have some sort of social justice element, at least on their social media.
Yeah. Or maybe in their mission statement on the website or something.
It could be in the mission statement. It could be a very simple, we do capoeira to support the African diaspora. That's in a lot of mission statements. It could be memes that they're posting. And the really interesting thing to me is that the percentages were just about the same for Capoeira Angola and Regional.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's, again, like that kind of stuff is a little bit foreign to me. And maybe there's, like, the groups that are doing that, I'm a little bit out of the loop with that. But, yeah, I think the way that we have always approached it has been, I guess, just a little more indirect. And yeah, so it's a little hard for me to relate to, but I am seeing more and more of that just on social media, like the calls for awareness,
right,
for things that outside of the culture of the culture of capoeira.
Absolutely.
But it's like, hey, be aware that this is happening with this group of people. And
right. And the student broke it down a little bit. We looked at racial justice, and we expected that to be a pretty big one, given the history of capoeira and the connection with the African diaspora. And it was. It was slightly higher in Capoeira Angola, but nothing that I would say is statistically significant. It was still pretty even. There were other things like gun violence awareness that people are talking about on social media. Some political statements, a lot of discussion of gender discrimination. And I know this is an ongoing thing in the capoeira community, so I don't know if you can speak to it within your own group or groups that you've encountered. Has there been any sort of, predatory behavior in the capoeira world that you've seen, and how are groups fighting back against that?
Yeah, I think that's a touchy subject.
Yeah.
Because I do think a lot of that is coming out in the air right now. I don't think it's something new.
No.
But I think the way that people are now dealing with it is new. And I'll give just like a brief example is, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, even, 5 years ago, people did not have, now when you go to an event, you have to fill out a code of conduct that say you agree to be on good behavior, not do this and that, like holding. It's almost like it's like a liability waiver. Those didn't exist before.
No.
I have seen some firsthand things happen. I guess primarily to over flirtatious type of things between men and women. And sometimes that happens because it's like an authority thing that people feel their level gives them over somebody else. And then I think also it's like people newer to capoeira look up to these other people, and it's like a use of power, either inadvertently or, you know, on purpose. But yeah, for sure, those are things going on, and I know that there's several groups that are, you know, of being like kind of broken apart and disconnected for just, you know, could even be rumors of things happening, you know, stuff like that.
The waiver is an interesting thing. I haven't heard anyone say that before. So, I mean, what are the specific things you have to sort of say you won't do?
I think like I haven't signed one or been to an event where I had to like do that.
Yeah.
It's been brought to my attention by different students, like, oh yeah, they make us sign these waivers now, and then that's like going on. But I imagine it's stuff like, you know, be respectful. I think some of it might have to do with like, don't put things on social media that are discrediting to others. You know, be responsible for your actions. I don't exactly know like the different things, but yeah, it's kind of like to hold people accountable. And I don't know if those waivers would ever hold up, but at least it's like a check to the consciousness before you go and just do whatever you want. Right. You know?
A reminder that there is a code of conduct.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, I've been seeing things like more female leaders being invited to groups as a way to protect students that might be vulnerable.
Interesting. I never heard that. I always, you know, we try to always bring, whether we do it or not, we always try to make an effort to bring some kind of like female professor or maestri or contramestre, something like that, because also like it gives our female community like the feeling that like, oh man, there's this powerful woman that can do this stuff, and it's something that myself as a man cannot provide. Right. That kind of just like moral or like, you know, like confidence boost or something like that. And so it's great to have that.
Yeah. See, and I would call that a form of social justice.
Yeah,
it's internal, but, you know, by providing a relatable model to your female students, you know, you're empowering them in a way, and I think that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, too, it's like, you know, there's to be able to recognize that you will not be able to teach or motivate one person through everything. Right. That you can be like their root or their foundation, but that person will need many teachers. Right. You know, and that was a big thing that my maestri taught us too. He's like, you know, you're not going to learn everything from me. Yeah. I'll get you halfway there. And then the rest is like, you need to do your own exploration, and you need to learn how to discriminate against, you know, things that you feel like are important and things that are not. Right. You know? Yeah. And sometimes you get caught up in things that are not important, thinking they are. And you kind of have to find your own way out of that. And I guess people measure those things differently. You know, everyone has like a different thermometer to measure that with. Right. You know?
Now, earlier, before we started recording, you and I were having conversations about money. And I think that there are some individuals who are very uncomfortable with the idea of commodifying capoeira, that it's something the ancestors passed down and it's so sacred that it needs to be used in the right ways. It needs to be used to advance vulnerable populations, and that to commodify it is kind of crass. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of being financially viable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I understand where they're coming from with that, and I do disagree with that method of well, I'm sorry. I disagree that the money is not important. Right. Right. I think that it is. And if you go back and just historically look at the way that Maestri Pastinha passed away, I mean, I think that we can all agree that if we could go back in time and give him whatever he needed not to end up like that, right? You know, it's like hindsight's 2020. Well, if you read Maestri Nanel's book titled Bimba that he just kind of came out with, he talks about that too, that Maestri Bimba had a very similar death as well. You know, like not a lot of money. He talks about him, he was in a hospital that did not have the level of care he needed. I'm not sure what his illness was.
Right.
And it was a weekend, and they couldn't get him transferred to a hospital that had the level of care, and he ended up dying.
Right.
You know, and those things to me is like that's an economic tangible thing that you can say, yeah, we need that.
Right.
Now that's a little extreme when you bring into perspective like the situation that we're in today. But the way I was brought up, understanding capoeira and business and classes was, if you really want to be mindful and you want to make a difference, you do need some level of support in order to do that.
Right.
You know, like you can't provide sometimes for others with just thin air. You know, and that's not to say that I also think that there's a big difference between social projects and what you're doing to sustain your academy, because you have rent and bills to pay as well.
Right. And
You
your
know?
own family to feed.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that that's why a lot of maestries migrated to the U.S. Because there was a market for that, and they are making a living here doing that.
Right.
They didn't come here because they hate Brazil.
Right.
They came here for a new life, as did a lot of other people. Right. We move around and according to like what's good for our life and like to sustain that.
Right.
And so to say, oh, I just want to do like free classes and I want to have, you know, everything free, like that's great. That's great. But somebody's paying for that some way or another. You know, that's like the way I looked at it. And my mastery raised us to think, you know, go to school and get a job and do these other things, and use capoeira as something in your community and just as a hobby and something that you love, and to try to preserve the art, like be an ambassador to preserve that art. But do yourself a service as well. And there's so many other things in the world. He's like, you shouldn't. I hope you're not just want to be like a professional capoeirista for all your life.
Right.
You know, I think that you can put a huge amount of effort into that and do other things as well. And by doing other things, sometimes you can even help the capoeira community even more. You know, if you're an engineer and you make $100,000 a year, and you want to sponsor a group to go to Brazil for the first time, well, then you can do it yourself, and you don't have to go through grants and this and that. You have like that ability to do it. And if that's the way you want to spend your money, then awesome.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I love that idea. You said that Mr. Bimba is maybe an extreme case because of the way he died in the hospital without having access to the medical service that he needs. But I'd push back and say that's not that extreme, and we have similar cases going on right here all the time. And one of the most inspiring stories I've heard so far was an individual who is a medical doctor, always committed to social justice. But when he did his residency, he found himself so busy that he wasn't doing as much activism. All of this was before he started capoeira. He becomes a capoeirista. He starts learning the songs, and he's frustrated because he doesn't know what the songs mean. So he takes it on himself to start learning Portuguese, translating, really studying the meaning of it, and realized in that process that he was not fulfilling his responsibility to his own ancestors in medical school, because his professors had taught him that this needs to be for the greater good. So it was through capoeira and the realization that we need to honor the ancestors and everything that we do, that he took a hard look at his own medical training and decided, you know what, I need to be an activist in the community. So he starts going out into the community, going to community meetings, rather than saying, I'm a doctor, here, do what I say. I'm a doctor, how can I serve you? And using his position of power to advocate for socialized medicine. And I thought that was so powerful. And all of it was because he really took a deeper look at the capoeira songs. And that was one of the things that sparked it. So what about in your group? Do you see people that are really studying Portuguese, learning the songs, trying to understand the core value system of the original capoeiristas?
Yeah, I think that that's something now that everybody's doing. Before, the first 10 years of my capoeira life, that was, we didn't have a lot of contact with other groups because there just weren't that many around.
Sure.
But it progressively like just ramped up into that to where it's like everywhere you go, you've got 30 people that are trying to speak Portuguese. Everywhere you go.
Yeah.
A lot of the mestres that are here in the U.S. have been here for a long time and don't speak English. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's pretty cool. One thing that I talked with Mestre Nano about in the podcast was that I asked him, what's the difference between teaching estrangeiros, just foreign people in general, not even just Americans, but Europeans and whatever, and Brazilians. And he said, you know, the funny thing is, the foreign people, they want to know every detail about everything.
Yeah.
Why this and why that, and how come you have to do things like this, and where did that come from? And sometimes I think some of the like Brazilians who already have that culture like innate inside them ask less questions because there's things that they probably understand just by way of like culture that maybe they don't even realize they just understand that.
Right.
But foreigners sure see everything that they don't understand.
Yeah.
And that's a bigger hole than understanding.
Yeah.
You know?
So,
And that was very interesting hearing Messi Nanel say that. You know, I was like, wow. He's like, I love it. I love teaching, you know, non-Brazilians because it's like they just want to know more and more and more and more and more.
that's really cool.
You know?
Yeah. So what role do you think teaching the history of slavery has in a Capoeirista's education, especially for estrangeiros?
That's hard. That's a hard question because myself, I've never been like I can touch on some of that, but I've never been like as historically accurate, like dived into that as deep as I could, as I could. But I mean, when you talk about are you talking about like slave history and culture in the U.S. or the history of the capoeira and
Brazil,
the oppression and that? Yeah, I mean, I think just to be like an ambassador of the art, you should know like the history and be able to like explain that just to kind of preserve the culture of capoeira.
Yeah.
You know, because it's different than like Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Right.
Right? Like, I don't think that there's as much a sense of Brazilian culture in Brazilian jiu-jitsu as there is in capoeira.
Right.
You know?
I agree. Yeah.
And so those are like a whole black and white like situation where you can see like the historical difference. But yeah, I think it's important to know where the songs come from and why. And also I think that like whether or not I'm African American or Brazilian or this or that, like there are things that I can relate to by way of knowing the roots and culture in my own life.
Right.
That I can identify with without have been like oppressed in that way.
Yeah.
You know?
What do you mean by that? Things in your own history?
Yeah, I mean, like understanding, and this is going to sound funny, but you look back and you hear about like just you know things that Mestre Bimba and Mestre Pastinha went through, or even like the slaves overcoming, you know, like fighting for their life and having to hide and having to do these things, and you know that the element of survival is there and it's possible,
Right.
at all cost. And like there's things in your life and obstacles where you'll come to a similar situation where you think like all is lost and you're just like, man, how am I ever gonna, or what can I possibly do?
Right.
And you can find a sense of motivation to overcome those things just by way of knowing about other cultures and having that feeling, I guess, connected to that history.
Yeah.
Right? Because I mean, at one point, everybody who's doing capoeira becomes capoeira.
Right.
You know? Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, maybe I wasn't born with capoeira in my blood.
Right.
But if I have children, they will be.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because it comes from somewhere. So that would be like my first generation of, you know, passing that on.
Yeah.
Much like a lot of the Brazilians and slaves, and they were generations of capoeira,
Absolutely.
da, 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 da.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the first wave or first generation that would be after my generation that's not Brazilian.
Right. Which is going to be really interesting to see the next generation grow up.
And I look at all the great masteries today, and Mestre Acordeon, Mestre Jalon, Mestre Itapuã, Mestre Camisa, all these great people, and I just think to myself, like, is our generation up and coming? Are we going to be able to do the same service as they did for the art as a whole?
Right.
And the answer is, I don't know, but we sure can give it like as much effort as we can.
Right.
And
I think it'll change. Globalization changes everything. Time changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I've met a lot of capoeiristas in the U.S. that are doing innovative things that I never would have imagined, and yet they see a strong connection with the roots of capoeira.
Mm-hmm.
There's a woman who is an incredibly strong capoeirista. I have so much respect for her. And one of the things that she does, she instills challenges. So each month it might be some different sort of challenge. Maybe it's meditate every day for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's, it could be practice your verticals or do so many kicks each day, but a lot of times it's something else. Try giving up plastic for a month. Those are the kinds of personal changes that will change society.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nothing that we would have seen, 100, 200 years ago with capoeiristas in Brazil, but it's new, it's rooted in the U.S., it responds to local problems, contemporary problems. And that stuff is really interesting to watch, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think that, as far as that, I see just a trend in general culture and society right now of just being more mindful about like your impact on in and around society and the planet and the,
and it's connected too. I used to look at some of these environmental issues that were being merged with capoeira. Maybe you've got Mestre Cobra doing permaculture, or you've got another capoeira group that's going out and doing beach cleanup. And I thought, well, what is the glue that holds these things together? And someone reminded me, well, many of the songs talk about Iemanjá. We have to respect the oceans because it's all part of capoeira.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, that's another thing that I can't say for myself that I ever made that direct connection. I could use that now as motivation that I see other people doing that to like expand my my level of just like consciousness and efforts. Like what are my efforts going towards?
Right.
And you can have like a different sense of purpose, because even that is like opening my eyes more to just why and the scope and the how and the purpose,
There was something, again, you and I were talking earlier today about this, going back to Mestre Bimba. There, in the literature, there have been these ideas that in creating Capoeira Regional, he created a quote-unquote whitened form because he put restrictions on it, said that you had to be gainfully employed or you had to be a student. What do you think of that allegation that it's a whitened or weakened form of capoeira?
Yeah, that's that's interesting. It's hard for me to give like a valid opinion, but just talking with Mestre Nanel about that and him kind of like clarifying it made a lot more sense to me the way that he put it, as far as like he felt like Mestre Bimba did the opposite, that he actually like expanded the like the net to grab different people in the society. And one of his biggest points was that when you're in the roda and it's like the music and you're clapping and you're singing and all these things, you're putting this energy all in. Nobody remembers where they're from. You just don't.
Right.
You just don't want to get kicked in the face.
True.
And so that was really cool to hear him, say, because I guess a lot of the stories that I was told of Mestre Bimba and where capoeira came from, and it was the poor and the lower class and Mestre Bimba was like, no, that's not like entirely true. And again, Mestre Bimba had his he talked about him having his social projects and stuff like this, but one of his main goals was to to break down those barriers.
Right.
And so he had doctors and lawyers and scholars and people from the favela and, university and all training together.
Yep.
And he had black and white and, different skin colors and I guess, descendants of whatever culture and heritage, Brazilian, European, things like that. And, that was, it was kind of a shock, like reading that in his book. Mm-hmm. And then talking to him about that in person.
Yeah.
I didn't expect it.
Right.
And I was almost like, whoa, wow.
Yeah.
It's just a whole different angle that I wasn't really aware of, I guess.
Well, and I think that's one of the most powerful things about capoeira here, and it's one of the reasons that this internal social justice is happening. When you have structurally diverse groups where you are mixing it up in the roda with people who come from different backgrounds, who look different than you, there's this sense of togetherness. And in anthropology speak, we call it communitas, transcending these individual differences to have some sort of meaningful connection in the moment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what it is when you have a bunch of people with different histories, different backgrounds, and they have that experience together. Then their eyes are opened to what it might be like to be that person, mm-hmm. and you're motivated to do something on behalf of that person or their community. So I thought it was really cool when you mentioned that earlier, because I was like, this thing that's happening right here and right now and has so much power. Mestre Bimba was doing it however many years ago too.
Yeah, it wasn't something new, and sometimes I think like a little bit of that was like lost from time to time and like mm-hmm. kind of came back. And even like you're saying, like you show up to a roda and you see someone from every like race and nationality here, and
yeah,
and many of the rodas that I went to in Brazil were the same,
right,
same way.
Yep.
You see like black people, you see white people, you see mulattoes, you see people from European descent, you see people from Bahia, and it's like
yep.
they're just all Brazilian,
right?
Different, skin tone and stuff. But when we think of like American, we think of like white people.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But it's a huge melting pot here as well.
Yes, absolutely. And, so what are some of the things that you think capoeira groups here could do to ensure that structural diversity inside of our groups? How do we make sure that everybody has a place in the roda?
I definitely think that like making an effort to provide that service to local communities that don't have financial means to come to your classes is important.
Yeah.
Because when you're holding classes and people are paying for it, you are going to get that demographic.
Right.
Unless you have a way to bring those people in and know that there's, like a financial break or there's whatever, mm-hmm. One thing that, going back to the idea of like, money is real.
Right.
Right. One thing that we've never done is turn somebody away because they didn't have the money to pay for class. That doesn't mean that we don't charge $125, $150 a month to do whatever. Mm-hmm. But when people fall on hard times, or if someone comes in to try class and it's like an underprivileged kid or something like this, like we would never tell them no.
Right.
But there do need to be checks and balances to not allow people to take advantage of that system, because then your whole support system is it's not sustainable.
Right.
It's just not.
Yeah.
And so if you want to do the best you can for your community, then those things need to be established, and you have to have checks and balances so that can't be taken advantage of. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like I don't think that charging for capoeira classes and making a living and doing this is wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Mestre
Camisa. So just touching real quick, the idea of the podcast, and I say this almost every time, is it's to bring people who don't speak Portuguese more information mm-hmm. from like the source.
Right.
And something that I want to start doing is there's a lot of information on YouTube mm-hmm. in Portuguese.
Right.
And I want to translate a lot of that and then make different podcasts out of that. And one of them in particular, if anybody is listening, I encourage you to go look this up. Mestre Camisa, who is the creator of Capoeira Abadá mm-hmm. and probably one of the biggest groups in the world, has a video on YouTube where he talks about 10 ways to make money as a capoeirista.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because he goes into just that. He's like, yeah, you can make a profession. And if you're not, it's your fault. You know,
That's
and he's like,
interesting.
you can write a book, you can do CDs, you can sell instruments, you can make instruments, you can have classes, you can do this, da, 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 da.
Right.
And he's like,
Right.
why aren't you doing that? You know, it was almost like he's like, you know, I don't I don't believe in you have to like suffer and sacrifice and live and die for nothing and have
Right.
nothing to be a great you know, ambassador and connoisseur of the art and pass this on. He's like, no, you need to be smart about it.
Right.
And you need to like sustain it and have something that you can maintain. And that's a really cool video.
That is cool.
But again, if you don't speak Portuguese, it's like,
Right.
it might as well not exist,
Exactly.
you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, that is great because this whole idea that you have to suffer for your art or whatever you want to say, I mean, that would restrict the only people that could be teachers are those that are already privileged, right? And so maybe having capoeira as an avenue of economic advancement is actually a form of social justice, which I think is an idea worth exploring.
yeah, for sure. For sure. And then you have like, you know, what we touched on a little bit before was the podcast was setting up the nonprofits.
Right.
You know, and the misconception that nonprofit means that you can't make money from it.
Right.
But if you have it organized and set up, like that can be your living.
Absolutely.
And you can do social projects and you can make sure that your future is secured by grants and finances and things like that, you know?
Right.
And I think that's really important. That's one thing that we talk about in episode, I think 3 with Conta Messi Gringos. They've had a nonprofit, a very functioning and well-functioning nonprofit for many years in Houston.
Right.
You know, and as well in San Antonio with Instructor Montoya.
Yeah. And so much of this comes down to the leaders, too. That's one of the things that I'm seeing in all of the interviews I've done for this project is if the leader is committed to social justice, then the group follows. But if it's, you know, a leader isn't interested in that for whatever reason, then the group doesn't go that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, you know, those kind of things for us was it wasn't something that had to be like spoken about. Like I was never given a lesson about, hey, here's how you need to do this. It's just like, I guess it just came down to doing what you thought was the right thing for other people.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I'm seeing is it's not always explicit. A lot of times it's very, very implicit. But liberation theology is kind of this signature ideology that gets promoted in a lot of different groups where, you know, groups are talking about education, literacy, political literacy. I mean, these are the ways that you claim equal citizenship with the more privileged members of your society. And so I think a lot of capoeira groups, even without having that discussion or being able to put those academic terms on what they're doing, that's exactly what they're doing. And it sounds like that's what you guys are doing too. Go out, teach a kid to do an AU, and the self-efficacy just kind of radiates out from there.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have the drive to do something for other people, you
Right.
know? And if you don't, that's okay. Don't force it. But
Right.
by being around more and more people, it's just it will naturally become something
It
that you
happens.
like strive to do.
Yeah.
You know, and again, like if you're not in a situation where you can help yourself first, you probably won't be able to help somebody else.
Agreed.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that's important to understand as well, because if you consider to some degree, you know, Contra Messi Metido a leader of his community, it was never a role that he applied for.
Right.
It was just something that was recognized by the community, and this is another thing that Mestre Bimba talked about too, was that becoming a mastery, a capoeira mastery, wasn't necessarily a title you were given. It was the way the community eventually recognized you.
Right.
And he talked about in Mestre Bimba's neighborhood, he became the go-to guy to just fix problems, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Like, this guy got arrested. Like, can you go talk to the cops? Hey, there's a fight over there in the corner. Hey, they're not letting this person go to school. And Mestre Bimba taught capoeira.
Yeah.
But he became that social icon that people,
Right.
you know, went to. Like in the neighborhood, when you didn't know who else to turn to, you go to that guy.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And there's been many times like that people have gone to Contra Messi Metido or myself that were part of our capoeira group, but to seek out help for some other aspect of their life.
Right.
You know, and maybe I can give some advice, or Michiru can give some advice, or help in like some kind of way.
Right.
You know, but yeah, it definitely wasn't like a title that, or something that was given, or even like we didn't strive to do that. It just
Right.
kind of happened.
Yeah, and I've seen that with multiple people that I've talked to too, that ultimately become leaders of their own group. Many of them say, "I never wanted to." Right? My mestre had to leave, or moved away, and so nobody else stood up to take on the role, and I did, and it was I didn't want to because there's so much responsibility.
Yeah.
And those are some of the greatest leaders that are doing the most for the people in their community, however you define that.
Yeah, and hang on one second. It's okay. I kind of lost track. How are you on time?
I'm good. It's about 6:10, so.
Okay. Yeah, it's up to you. Whenever you want to kind
Okay.
of wrap up, just sort of like go into it, and
Okay.
and that's fine.
I mean, I think we've probably covered the basics, unless there's anything else you can think of.
No, I mean, I could talk about whatever all day, so
Yeah.
that's fine.
Okay.
But then maybe it would be cool, and I'll cut out all of this, and just sort of like some way to kind of like wrap it up, and then where people can find your work, and especially your book. And
Is it okay if I kind of like invite people to get in
absolutely,
contact
yes,
with me?
yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. So this is an ongoing project. It's one that will most likely turn into a book over the next 18 to 24 months. But I'm still at the point of gathering interviews, and everything I do is anonymous, so I give people pseudonyms. But I really just want the Capoeira community to see themselves reflected in this book when it ultimately comes out. So if anyone's interested in participating in the study, doing an interview with me, you could send me an email at lauren.griffith, lauren.griffith, at ttu.edu. Or I also manage a Facebook page called Capoeira Research, so you can find me there, send me a private message. But I'd love to talk to people that are engaged with social justice through Capoeira in some way. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you reaching out, and I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast.
Thank
Until
you
next
for
time.
having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks. Cool.